Hey old school gamers, today we're going to get into the tale of Sir Dudley as part of the NPC Rolodex, entry number 1. And where did NPC Rolodex come from? Well, in our last episode here at Grumpy Old GMs, I started talking about a conversation I had with Ronzilla0 on our Discord server about ad-lib DMing. What happens when player characters go off the map, or how do you suddenly just have stuff that you can DM with pretty much zero preparation. And so I mentioned that there's two parts to that. One of those parts is NPCs that I started talking about last time, and that kind of inspired me to start doing a Rolodex series, Rolodex of NPCs, some of these NPCs that might be useful for you, or some examples of NPCs. Fleshed out based on either real people or at least realistic people with realistic motives. So as my mentor used to teach, when he taught me about how to do NPCs, that he said, the Dark Lord Sauron, these iconic paragons of darkness, embodiments of evil with a capital E, that's an abstract concept that people don't really relate to. But I'm going to present a villain to you today that's just scum. Just scum. And so players have gotten way more upset about this guy and wanted this guy dead and wanted to kill him and wanted to stop him way more than they've ever cared about some abstract embodiment of darkness or evil, because the abstract embodiment of darkness or evil is ultimately just a boss with a bunch of hit points that has to be DPS down. So, or you have to figure out how to counter his resistances and immunities or whatever. So let's take a look at Sir Dudley. Now, the background of how this came about, how I arrived at this place as a game master, it was the 1990s. I was a young 20-something college kid, and so were most of the people at my table. We were gaming in the game shop's basement in Warrensburg, Missouri, and second edition had been out for a little bit, and second edition was just cranking out books like there was no tomorrow. Like every month the game was totally reinvented with new books. There was this book that came out called The Tome of Magic, and there are issues that people are having with D&D today in 2023 and the past several years, like power creep. And our hobby, our game, has seen this before. When second edition came out, we, us gamers back then, we thought that power creep was a major issue back then. Boy, howdy, if we could have jumped in a time machine and come forward and seen about how power creep is affecting our hobby and our game now. But anyway, but this Tome of Magic had these spells that were kind of broken and stuff, and it reminds me of a couple Christmases ago, now, maybe Christmas 2022, I think, when Strixhaven hardback came out from WotC, and that Silvery Barb spell came out, and instantly people started talking all over the internet about how their DMs were just banning that spell. So the same, our hobby, our game has seen, our style of game has seen this kind of thing before. There's nothing new under the sun. So the Tome of Magic came out. There were these spells in it that were kind of OP and broken, at least for second edition. And for several weeks, the sense at the table got to be very antagonistic. Now, there is a little bit of an antagonist element to being a DM, but this was like way more than normal. There were bad feelings involved. There were some raised voices. There was obvious dissatisfaction. The players were basically, for character levels, they were in their teens. They were doing some powerful stuff. And they were just jacking up these broken spell combinations and just taking some of the thought and some of the stuff in second edition that wasn't very well thought out, and just lawyer loopholing it to death and just being nuts. And I started throwing liches at them and powerful vampire mages, and I was having, my villains were doing the same broken things right back at them. And it was just like a war of escalation, and nobody was having any fun. And so my mentor, he taught me about how NPCs can just be scum, and they don't have to be powered. And D&D isn't just about how many magic items you have, or what spells you can cast, or how many hit points you have, or how much DPS you can crank out. And so the first villain that I was inspired to create according to his teachings, was Sir Dudley the Dastardly, aka Sir Dudley the Daring, for the people that actually liked him, that didn't actually know that he was Sir Dudley the Dastardly. Now, Sir Dudley the Dastardly was an anti-paladin. He was 5th level, and I never leveled him up as an NPC. I just left him at 5th level. The party, like I said, was in their teens for levels, like levels 11 to 16. They were pretty powerful. Any of them could have taken him in combat, probably. I mean, certainly they could have taken him as a group, and probably most of the individuals could have taken him, but it wasn't about taking him in combat. What Sir Dudley would do is he would go to podunk, medieval, little peasant, commoner villages, and he would find ladies who were approaching 30. Because in a society based on medieval Europe, in these little peasant villages and everything, lifespan wasn't that long to start with. Pushing 30 culturally, that meant like a woman might, she was well on her road to spinsterhood. People were worried about that. And so he would find these ladies, and especially if they had a large dowry, or if their family was rich, or if their family was well connected, and he would ingratiate himself into the village as Sir Dudley the Daring, and he would begin courting this young woman. Of course, in 2023 we'd say she's a young woman approaching 30, but that's not what that culture was thinking at the time. And he'd start courting this lady, and everybody would just fall in love with him. That she was this handsome, daring knight. I wanted her, and it was so romantic. And of course, the town thought that they were going to get a hero out of the deal. That this guy was going to settle down and have some kids in their village, and he'd be around more. Their village would get protection and maybe some notoriety because it was a famous hero. Sir Dudley the Daring had settled in their town, married one of their local girls. And so everybody loved him, but what Sir Dudley the Daring did, or the Dastardly, is he would make sure that after he'd received the dowry, or after he'd received the inheritance, or after he'd leveraged the family's connections, he would make sure that the young lady didn't live too long after the wedding. And then he would move on, because in D&D worlds or Pathfinder worlds, old school essentials, whatever, OSR, whatever you like to play. But in these worlds where we like to play the various versions of our game, there's no internet, there's no telephone, there's no television or radio, there's no cable network news. There is no way, so Sir Dudley the Dastardly, he was able to just kind of move from village to village and scam the entire village. And so there was a string of dead wives in his background. And when the party knew about this, they, would like to confront him. I mean, this guy's scum, and he's a serial killer, and he takes advantage of people. He's a manipulator, and, those poor innocent ladies. So these towns that are just taken for a ride. And the party would want to confront him, but nobody would believe them. And the town would run interference for Sir Dudley. Like, oh, he's such a nice man. And who are you again? Oh, you're one of those murder hobo adventuring parties. And they might even have know some of the party's reputation, especially if your party is murder hobos. The village their reputation might not be the most sterling for some of the things they may have done if they're a typical adventuring party at most people's tables. And so there was never any opportunity to confront Sir Dudley in combat. There was never any opportunity to dispatch him, or even necessarily to challenge him. A few times they tried to challenge him to a duel, and he managed to weasel his way out of that. But eventually they did get him. It took, I think it took over a year in real life, and maybe 2 years in game time. Because I was actually keeping track of game time very nerdily, separate from real life time. I was doing Forgotten Realms at the time, actually advancing the Forgotten Realms calendar through the campaign. But Sir Dudley the Dastardly was just scum, and he was only 5th level. I mean, he was he was less than half the level of most of my party members, and yet it's really relatable. Very often in life, we know something, and we know it, and it is important that it be communicated to other people. It is important that other people understand, and they're just not going to believe us, no matter what we do, no matter what we say, no matter how much evidence there is. Other people just aren't going to believe us, and so this is a situation that a lot of us can relate to. So that's the story of Sir Dudley the Dastardly. He did finally die at my table back in the 90s, but a lot of my players weren't even born then now, so I could bring him back or have somebody else do a similar scheme. If you like this idea for an NPC, you could directly rip him off as I've described him, or you could change him a little bit, or you could, change his gender, change his race, whatever. But think about the idea of villains that aren't necessarily the dark lord or lady of evil, but what if they're just scum? All right. In the meantime, if you feel like you'd benefit from these videos or from our coaching, or if you'd like to play with us, visit grumpyoldgms.com. We've recently launched a Patreon coaching program, and we have open spots to game with us at our tables. That's grumpyoldgms.com. And in the meantime, I'll see you around the gaming table.